Ambassador Vexthril of the Corinthian Empire had studied humans for 3 standard cycles before this meeting. He had read every report, watched every recording, and memorized every detail about their strange customs. He had consulted with military strategists and intelligence analysts. He had practiced human phrases and gestures until his assistants grew tired of watching. He thought he was ready for whatever humanity might throw at him. He was completely and utterly wrong. The Terran delegation arrived at Station Nexus 7 in a ship that was smaller than expected. The Corinthians had sent their largest diplomatic cruiser, a vessel that could hold 2,000 crew members and was covered in gold plating to show their wealth and power. The ship had been polished until it gleamed, and it hung in space like a jeweled beast waiting to devour its prey. The human ship looked like a cargo freighter that someone had painted white. It had no decorations, no symbols of power, nothing to suggest the importance of the people it carried. Vexthril stood in the docking bay with his 12 assistants, all dressed in their finest ceremonial armor. The armor was heavy and uncomfortable, but tradition demanded it. Each piece had been crafted by master artisans and passed down through generations of Corinthian diplomats. They had been standing for 2 hours because the Corinthian protocols said they must be present before the guests arrived. His legs were tired and his back ached, but he kept his posture perfect. Showing weakness was not permitted. The human ship docked with a soft thump. The airlock opened with a gentle hiss, and Vexthril prepared himself for whatever strange greeting ritual the humans might perform. He had read that humans sometimes press their mouths together in greeting, a disturbing custom called kissing, or they touched their hands in complex patterns that varied by region and relationship. He was not sure he could do either of those things with his Corinthian anatomy, and he worried about causing offense. 3 humans walked out of the ship. They were not wearing armor. They were not wearing anything that looked expensive or impressive. The lead human, a female with brown skin and silver hair, was wearing simple clothes in dark blue. The fabric looked comfortable rather than formal. She was smiling, and the smile reached her eyes in a way that seemed genuine rather than practiced. "Ambassador Vexthril," she said, walking toward him with her hand extended. Her voice was warm and friendly. "I'm Sarah Chen. It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much for agreeing to host this conference. Your station is absolutely beautiful from the outside. I can't wait to see more of it." Vexthril stared at her hand. He knew what this gesture meant. The humans called it a handshake, a greeting where they briefly clasped each other's manipulator appendages. It was supposed to be a sign of trust, showing that neither party held a weapon. In ancient human history, warriors would grasp hands to prove they were not armed. The custom had survived long past its practical purpose. He reached out with his own hand, which was larger than hers and had 4 fingers instead of 5. She took it and shook it firmly but gently, being careful not to squeeze too hard. Her skin was warm and soft, and her grip was confident without being aggressive. She met his eyes directly, which in Corinthian culture would be considered either a challenge or an expression of deep intimacy. But her expression held neither aggression nor inappropriate closeness. She simply seemed glad to see him. "We have been anticipating your arrival, Ambassador Chen," Vexthril said, using the formal speech patterns that his culture required. "The Corinthian Empire welcomes the delegation from Terra with appropriate ceremony and recognition of your species' accomplishments in the fields of exploration, technology, and interstellar commerce." Sarah Chen laughed. It was a warm sound, not mocking or cruel. "Please call me Sarah, and I hope we can skip some of the formality. We have a lot of work to do, and I find that people work better when they're comfortable. Don't you agree?" Vexthril did not know how to respond to this. No one had ever asked him to skip formality before. The Corinthian Empire had 17,000 years of diplomatic tradition, and every part of that tradition served a purpose. To skip formality was to show disrespect. It was to suggest that the relationship was not worth the effort of proper protocol. But Sarah Chen did not seem disrespectful. She seemed genuinely, honestly friendly. There was nothing calculating in her expression, No hint that she was testing him or trying to gain advantage. She simply wanted him to be comfortable. "Perhaps we should proceed to the conference hall," Vexthril said, falling back on protocol when he could not think of anything else. "Your quarters have been prepared according to the specifications your government provided. I hope you will find them satisfactory." "That's very kind of you," Sarah said. She gestured to the two humans behind her. "This is Dr. James Okonkwo, our cultural attaché, and Maria Santos, our trade specialist. They're looking forward to working with your team." The two other humans also smiled and offered their hands for shaking. Dr. Okonkwo was a tall man with dark skin and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His handshake was gentle, almost careful, as if he was aware of his size and did not want to overwhelm anyone. Maria Santos was shorter, with curly black hair and an energetic way of moving. She bounced slightly on her feet as if she could barely contain her excitement. Both of them seemed genuinely happy to be here. Vexthril's assistant shook the humans' hands in turn, looking confused by the whole process. None of them had met humans before, and none of them understood why these aliens were being so casual. In their experience, diplomatic encounters were formal affairs, filled with ritual and carefully measured words. The humans acted as if they were meeting old friends. As they walked through the station toward the conference hall, Sarah Chen asked questions. Not the formal questions that diplomats usually asked, about territories and resources and military strength. She asked about the station itself, about how it was built, about the engineering challenges of maintaining such a large structure in deep space. She asked about the artwork on the walls and the music playing softly in the background. "This mosaic is beautiful," she said, stopping in front of a large display that showed the founding of the Corinthian Empire. The mosaic was made of millions of tiny colored tiles, each one placed by hand according to ancient techniques. "How old is it?" "It is 3,000 years old," Vexthril said. "It depicts the Unification War, when the 7 tribes of Corintha joined together to form our empire. The central figure is Emperor Valthrek I, who convinced the tribes that they were stronger together than apart. The colors are amazing. Is this made with natural minerals or synthetic pigments? I've never seen that shade of blue before." Vexthril found himself answering questions he had never been asked before. He explained the traditional methods used to create the mosaic, the significance of each color in Corinthian culture, the history of the artists who had made it, and how their families still practice the same crafts today. Sarah listened with what appeared to be genuine interest. She asked follow-up questions that showed she was really paying attention, not just being polite. Dr. Okonkwo joined the conversation, comparing the mosaic to similar art forms from human history. He spoke about ancient Earth civilizations that had created similar works, and how the techniques had been preserved and adapted over millennia. It was a scholarly discussion, but it felt natural rather than forced. When they reached the conference hall, the human delegation did something unexpected. Instead of immediately taking their seats at the negotiating table, they asked for a tour of the facilities. They wanted to see everything, from the kitchen where the food was prepared to the gardens where the staff relaxed during breaks. "You have plants from 17 different worlds in here," Maria Santos said as they walked through the garden. The garden occupied an entire level of the station, a carefully maintained ecosystem that provided both food and recreation for the staff. "That's incredible. How do you maintain the different atmospheric requirements? Some of these species need completely different conditions." The station's chief botanist, who had never been included in a diplomatic event before, found herself explaining her work to the human trade specialist. Her name was Velana, and she had spent 40 years perfecting the art of maintaining alien plant life. Maria asked intelligent questions and took notes on a small device. She seemed genuinely interested in learning, not just gathering intelligence. "This is actually relevant to our discussions," Maria explained when Vexthril gave her a questioning look. "One of the things we hope to negotiate is an agricultural exchange program. If we can understand how you maintain diverse ecosystems, we might be able to adapt your techniques for our colony worlds. And we have some methods that might help you too." It was such a reasonable explanation, such a practical approach, but it also meant that Maria was thinking about how to help both sides, not just how to gain advantage for Terra. Vexthril watched all of this with growing confusion. This was not how diplomacy worked. Diplomacy was supposed to be formal. It was supposed to involve long speeches and carefully worded proposals and subtle threats hidden behind polite language. The humans were not doing any of those things. They were just talking to people, being friendly, showing genuine curiosity about everything they saw. That night, after the humans had retired to their quarters, Vexthril met with his senior advisors to discuss the situation. They gathered in a secure conference room, surrounded by equipment designed to prevent any possible surveillance. "I do not understand their strategy," said his first advisor, an older Corinthian named Thresmal. His scales were gray with age, but his mind was still sharp. He had served in diplomatic postings for over 200 years. "They ask questions about our culture, our technology, our daily lives. What intelligence are they gathering?" "Perhaps that is their strategy," said another advisor named Kelvas. She was younger, more ambitious, always looking for hidden threats. "They learn about us through casual conversation, gathering information that formal negotiations would never reveal. They build profiles of our decision makers, identify weaknesses to exploit later." "But what do they plan to do with that information?" Thresmal asked. "They have shown no interest in our military capabilities or defensive positions. They asked about our gardens and our art and our food. What tactical advantage comes from knowing how we grow vegetables?" The room fell silent. None of them had an answer. Vexthril thought about Sarah Chen's smile, about the way she had listened when he explained the mosaic. He thought about Dr. Okonkwo's kind eyes and Maria Santos's energetic curiosity. He thought about the way the humans had treated everyone they met, from the ambassador himself to the lowliest maintenance worker, with the same friendly respect. "I think," he said slowly, "that they are doing exactly what they appear to be doing. They are trying to understand us, not as enemies or rivals, but as people." His advisors stared at him in silence. The concept was so foreign to Corinthian diplomatic tradition that they did not know how to respond. Understanding the enemy was important, yes, but understanding them as people, that was dangerous. That was how you started to care about them, and caring about your opponent was the first step toward losing. The next morning, the formal negotiations began. The conference hall had been arranged according to Corinthian tradition, with the two delegations seated on opposite sides of a long table. The table was made of rare wood from the Corinthian homeworld, a material so valuable that just the tabletop was worth more than most ships. It was designed to create distance between the parties, to establish a clear line between allies and adversaries. Sarah Chen looked at the arrangement and smiled. "Would you mind if we moved things around a bit?" she asked. "I find it hard to have a real conversation when people are so far apart. It feels like we're shouting across a canyon." Before Vexthril could respond, she and her team had already started rearranging the furniture. They pushed the long table to the side and arranged the chairs in a circle. The Corinthian advisors watched in shock as centuries of tradition were casually set aside. Thresmal's face went pale. Kelvas looked like she wanted to protest but could not find the words. "There," Sarah said, sitting down and looking around the circle with satisfaction. "Much better. Now we can actually see each other. Now we can have a real conversation." The negotiations that followed were unlike anything Vexthril had experienced in his 400 years of diplomatic service. Instead of making demands and counterdemands, Sarah Chen asked questions about what the Corinthian Empire actually needed. Instead of threatening consequences for noncompliance, she suggested solutions that would benefit both parties. Instead of hiding her own goals, she explained exactly what Terra hoped to achieve and why. When they reached a difficult point about trade routes through Corinthian space, Sarah did not push harder. She did not threaten. She did not hint at consequences. She stopped, acknowledged the difficulty, and asked if they could take a break to think about creative solutions. "This is clearly important to both of us," she said. "Let's not rush it. Let's take some time to really understand each other's concerns and see if we can find a way forward that works for everyone." During the break, Dr. Okonkwo found Vexthril standing alone near the window, looking out at the stars. The view was spectacular, 1,000,000 points of light scattered across the darkness like scattered jewels. "You look troubled, Ambassador," the human said, coming to stand beside him. He did not invade Vexthril's space, but he was close enough for quiet conversation. "I am trying to understand your people," Vexthril admitted. "This is not the way diplomacy is conducted. In my experience, negotiations are a form of warfare, conducted with words instead of weapons. Each side tries to gain advantage, to force the other into unfavorable positions to win." Dr. Okonkwo nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that perspective. Many species approach diplomacy that way. Many human nations used to approach it that way too. But we learned, through a lot of painful history, that treating negotiations as warfare usually leads to actual warfare. We find that it's better to try to understand what the other side really wants and find ways to give it to them while also getting what we want. And if those goals are incompatible, then we look for creative solutions. We dig deeper, try to understand the underlying needs rather than just the stated positions. And if we truly can't find any common ground, we're honest about it. We don't pretend to agree when we don't, and we don't make threats we're not willing to follow through on. Trust is the most valuable resource in diplomacy. Once it's gone, it's very hard to get back." Vexthril considered this. In Corinthian tradition, showing too much trust is seen as weakness. Our rivals will exploit it. They will take whatever we offer and give nothing in return. "Some might," Dr. Okonkwo agreed. His voice was calm, not defensive. "We've encountered species like that, but we've found that most species respond positively when they're treated with respect and honesty. And those who try to exploit our trust tend to find that we're much less friendly the second time around. We forgive mistakes, but we remember bad faith." There was something in his voice that gave Vexthril pause, a quiet strength beneath the friendly exterior, a hint of steel wrapped in velvet. He realized that the humans were not naive. They were simply choosing a different approach, and they were prepared for that approach to fail. When the negotiations resumed, Vexthril found himself speaking more openly than he had intended. He explained the real reasons behind Corinthian concerns about the trade routes, including strategic information that would normally be kept secret. Sarah Chen listened carefully, asked clarifying questions, and then proposed a solution that addressed those concerns while still meeting the Terran requirements. It was, Vexthril had to admit, a better solution than anything he could have proposed himself. It protected Corinthian interests he had not even mentioned, because Sarah had correctly guessed what they would be. She had understood his people well enough to anticipate their needs. By the end of the first day, they had made more progress than Vexthril had expected to make in the entire week. As the delegations prepared to leave for the evening, Sarah Chen approached him with a warm smile. "Ambassador, I know this isn't part of your formal protocols, but would you like to join us for dinner? Nothing official, just a chance to relax and get to know each other better. I'd love to hear more about those star maps you mentioned." Vexthril froze. He had mentioned his star map collection in passing, a single comment about how a particular trade route reminded him of an ancient chart. He had not expected anyone to remember, let alone care. He knew that accepting would be a violation of tradition. He knew that his advisors would disapprove. He knew that he should politely decline and maintain proper distance between himself and the foreign delegation. "I would like that very much," he heard himself say. That dinner changed everything. They ate in a small private room, with no servants or assistants present. Sarah had requested simple human food, nothing elaborate or formal. She had also asked the station's kitchen to prepare some Corinthian dishes, saying that she wanted to try them. The combination was strange but somehow pleasant, different flavors and textures mixed together in unexpected harmony. The conversation was casual. Sarah asked about Vexthral's family, his childhood, his hobbies outside of work. He found himself telling her about his collection of ancient star maps, a passion that he had never mentioned in any professional setting. The collection had started when he was young, before he entered diplomatic service, and it had grown over the centuries into something quite remarkable. He had maps that showed how different civilizations had understood the universe, their theories, and their dreams and their mistakes. Sarah was genuinely interested. She asked questions about specific maps, about the stories behind them, about what they revealed about the cultures that had created them. She shared her own love of astronomy, how she had spent her childhood staring at the stars from her family's home in the mountains of Earth, dreaming about what might be out there. Maria Santos told stories about her grandmother, who had immigrated to Earth from a colony world when Maria was young. The grandmother had brought seeds from her homeworld and planted a garden that survived for 3 generations, a tiny piece of another world growing in Terran soil. Maria's love of botanical exchange had grown from that garden, from watching her grandmother tend plants that should not have survived so far from home. Dr. Okonkwo talked about his research into comparative cultural evolution and how studying different species had changed his understanding of humanity itself. He had spent decades learning about alien civilizations, and each one had taught him something new about what it meant to be intelligent, to be social, to be alive. For the first time in centuries of diplomatic service, Vexthral felt like he was having a conversation with friends rather than negotiating with rivals. The humans asked about his life, his interests, his hopes and fears. They shared their own stories in return. They laughed together at jokes that crossed cultural boundaries, found common ground in unexpected places. It was dangerous. He knew it was dangerous, but he could not bring himself to care. Later that night, alone in his quarters, Vexthral sat and thought about what had happened. He was an experienced diplomat. He knew all the tricks, all the tactics, all the ways that negotiations could be manipulated. He should have been able to recognize what the humans were doing. He should have seen through their strategy. The problem was that he did not think they were doing anything. They were not manipulating him. They were not using psychological tricks or social engineering. They were simply being friendly, being genuine, being themselves. And that, he realized, was the most dangerous thing of all. Because it made him want to trust them. It made him want to be their friend. The next morning, when the delegations gathered again, something had changed. The Corinthian advisors, who had dined with the Terran assistants the previous evening, were more relaxed. They smiled at their human counterparts. They made small talk before the negotiations began, asking about families and hobbies and plans for the future. Vexthral watched this transformation with a mixture of wonder and alarm. In a single evening, the humans had done something that no other species had ever accomplished. They had made the Corinthians like them. Sarah Chen sat down in the circle of chairs and pulled out a document. "I've been thinking about the trade route issue all night," she said, "and I have a proposal that I think might work for everyone, but I want to be honest about something first." She paused, looking directly at Vexthral. Her expression was serious but not confrontational. "This proposal is good for Earth. It gives us access to markets we've been wanting to reach for decades. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but I also think it's good for the Corinthian Empire. Here's why." She laid out her reasoning clearly and simply, without jargon or diplomatic obfuscation. She explained exactly how Earth would benefit, exactly how the Corinthian Empire would benefit, and exactly what each side would need to give up to make it work. She did not hide the costs or exaggerate the gains. She presented the truth, clearly and completely. "I know that's not how negotiations usually work," she said when she was finished. "Usually each side tries to hide their real interests and make the other side guess. Each side pretends that every concession is a great sacrifice, even when it's not. But I don't want to play that game. I want both of us to get a good deal, and I think the best way to do that is to be honest about what we want." Vexthril looked at his advisors. They were all staring at the document Sarah had presented, clearly struggling with the same confusion he felt. This level of transparency was unheard of. It should have been weakness. It should have been an invitation to exploitation. In any normal negotiation, they would take this information and use it to extract better terms. But somehow it did not feel like an opportunity. It felt like a gift. "Why?" Vexthril asked. "Why would you reveal so much? In any other negotiation, this information would be used against you." Sarah's smile was gentle, understanding. "Because I don't want to beat you, Ambassador. I want to work with you. The galaxy is a big place, and it's full of threats that neither of our species can face alone. I think we could be stronger together than we are apart. And that starts with trust. Real trust, not the careful calculation that passes for trust in most negotiations." The negotiations continued for 5 more days. There were disagreements, difficult conversations, and moments of genuine tension. Not everything was easy. Some issues required long discussions and creative thinking to resolve, but throughout it all, the humans maintained their approach. They were honest about their goals, transparent about their methods, and willing to compromise when compromise was possible. They also continued to be friendly. They shared meals with the Corinthian staff. They asked questions about Corinthian history and culture. They told jokes and laughed at the jokes that others told. They treated everyone they met not as obstacles to be overcome, but as people worthy of respect. By the time the negotiations concluded, the Corinthians had agreed to more than Vexthril had ever expected to give. They had opened trade routes, shared technology, and committed to a framework for future cooperation that would have been unthinkable a week ago. His advisors were worried. They thought he had given away too much. They thought the humans had somehow tricked them. But Vexthril knew the truth. The humans had not tricked them. They had simply been themselves. They had been friendly, honest, and genuine, and in doing so, they had accomplished something that threats and manipulation could never achieve. They had made the Corinthians want to be their friends. As the Terran ship prepared to depart, Sarah Chen came to say goodbye. She hugged Vexthril, which was a human custom that involved pressing bodies together briefly. It should have been uncomfortable. Among his people, such physical contact was reserved for intimate relationships, but somehow it was not uncomfortable at all. It felt natural, appropriate, right. "Thank you, Ambassador," she said. "This has been one of the best negotiations I've ever been part of. I hope we can work together again soon." "I hope so as well," Vexthril said, and he meant it. After the humans left, Vexthril wrote his report to the Corinthian High Council. He knew they would be concerned about the concessions he had made. He knew they would question his judgment, so he tried to explain what he had learned. "The Terran Diplomats are dangerous," he wrote, "but not in the way we expected. They do not threaten or coerce. They do not manipulate or deceive. Instead, they make you want to be their friend. They show genuine interest in your culture, your history, your concerns. They are honest about their goals and transparent about their methods. And somehow, through nothing more than kindness and respect, they make you want to help them succeed." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "I believe this is intentional. I believe that humanity has developed this approach through centuries of experience. They have learned something that our older civilization has forgotten. They understand that friendship is more powerful than fear, that trust is more valuable than territory, that the best allies are those who genuinely want to support you, not those who have been forced into cooperation through threats." He looked out at the stars, thinking about Sarah Chen's warm smile, about the way she had listened when he talked about his star maps, about the dinner they had shared. "We should be cautious," he concluded. Not because the humans cannot be trusted, but because their methods are so effective. Every species that encounters them will face the same challenge. They will find themselves wanting to be friends with humanity. They will find themselves trusting humans more than they intended. They will find themselves making agreements that benefit both parties, rather than seeking advantage at any cost. He saved the report and sent it to the High Council. Then he sat back and waited. 3 months later, the first Terran trade ships arrived in Corinthian space. The crews were friendly and professional, just like their diplomats. They followed all the protocols, paid fair prices, and treated everyone they met with respect. They learned local customs and followed them carefully. They apologized sincerely for mistakes and made genuine efforts to correct them. They also brought gifts, small things selected specifically for each person they dealt with. For Vexthril, they brought a rare star map from Earth's ancient history, showing how humanity had once believed the universe was organized. It was beautiful and strange and perfect, a window into another civilization's dreams. The note attached to it was handwritten by Sarah Chen. It said simply, "I remembered you mentioned you collected these. I saw this at an auction and thought of you. Hope you're well. Sarah." Vexthril held the map in his hands and felt something unfamiliar. It took him a moment to recognize the emotion. It was gratitude and affection and the warm, dangerous feeling of friendship. The report he had sent to the High Council had been right. The Terran diplomats were dangerous, not because they were deceptive or aggressive, but because they made you want to be their friend. And once that happened, everything changed. In the years that followed, the relationship between the Corinthian Empire and the Terran Union grew stronger, not through treaties imposed by force, not through alliances born of necessity, but through genuine connection. The Corinthians helped the humans navigate complex galactic politics. The humans helped the Corinthians modernize their trade infrastructure. Both sides benefited. Both sides grew. And it all started with a simple handshake and a genuine smile. Other species watched this transformation with concern. The Vectari Confederation, longtime rivals of the Corinthian Empire, called for an emergency summit to discuss the growing Terran influence. Ambassador Zektai, the Vectari representative, was determined to understand and counter the human threat. He arrived at the summit with extensive files on Terran psychology, negotiating tactics, and historical patterns of expansion. He was prepared for manipulation, for subtle coercion, for all the tricks that predatory species use to expand their influence. The Vectari had survived for millennia by being smarter and stronger than their enemies, and Zektai intended to prove that they could not be so easily conquered. He was not prepared for Ambassador Sarah Chen to greet him with a warm smile and a genuine question about Vectari poetry. The Vectari were known throughout the galaxy as warriors and poets. Their epic verses told stories of great battles and ancient heroes. It was the core of their cultural identity, the thing they valued most about themselves. Their poetry was taught in schools, recited at ceremonies, and passed down through generations as the highest expression of what it meant to be Vectari. And somehow this human knew about it. Not just a surface knowledge, but a real understanding. She quoted a passage from the great saga of Valkith, one of the most sacred Vectari texts, and asked Zektai what he thought it meant. She pronounced the ancient words correctly, with the proper rhythm and emphasis. "How do you know this?" he demanded, his warrior's suspicion flaring. His hand moved instinctively toward the weapon he was not carrying. "I studied," Sarah said simply. "When I knew I would be meeting you, I wanted to understand your culture. Poetry seemed like a good place to start. It tells you so much about what a people values, what they fear, what they hope for. You can learn more about a civilization from their art than from their military records." She paused, her expression becoming more thoughtful. "I have to admit, I was surprised. The Vectari have a reputation as warriors, but your poetry is so beautiful, so full of love and loss and hope. The way Valkith mourns for his fallen comrades, the way he dreams of a future without war, it made me realize that there's much more to your people than the stories we usually hear. Zektai did not know how to respond. No alien had ever shown interest in Vektari poetry before. Most species dismissed it as primitive or incomprehensible. They saw only the warrior culture, the military might, the history of conquest. But this human had looked deeper, and she had found something that even many Vektari had forgotten. "Why?" he asked, echoing Vexthral's question from months before. "Why would you spend time learning about our culture? We are not allies. We may never be allies. Your people and mine have competing interests throughout this region." Sarah's smile was gentle. "Because I think the best way to avoid becoming enemies is to understand each other. And even if we do become enemies, I'd rather fight someone I understand than someone I've dismissed as a stereotype. Besides, your poetry really is beautiful. I've started sharing it with friends back on Earth. They love it." The summit that followed was difficult. The Vektari had genuine grievances with the Terran Union, related to territorial disputes and trade conflicts. Some of these issues had been building for years, and there was real anger on both sides. The humans did not dismiss these concerns or try to minimize them. Instead, they acknowledged them honestly and worked to find solutions. They did not always succeed. Some issues were too complex, too deeply rooted in historical conflicts, to be resolved quickly. But the humans did not pretend that agreement was possible when it was not. They did not make promises they could not keep or threats they would not follow through on. They were honest about the limits of what they could offer. And throughout it all, they continued to treat the Vektari with respect. Not the formal, distant respect of diplomatic protocol, but the genuine respect of people who valued their counterparts as individuals. They listened when the Vektari spoke, asked questions to make sure they understood, and responded thoughtfully to concerns. By the end of the summit, Ambassador Zektai found himself in an uncomfortable position. He had come to oppose the Terran influence, to warn his government about the danger of human expansion. But he could not honestly say that the humans had done anything wrong. They had been fair, honest, and respectful. They had also been friendly, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. "I understand now," he wrote in his report to the Vektari Confederation, "why the Corinthians allied with humanity. It is not because the humans are powerful or because they offered favorable terms. It is because they make you want to be their friend. They show genuine interest in your culture, your values, your concerns. They treat you as an equal, not as a potential conquest. And somehow, through nothing more than kindness and respect, they make you want to help them succeed." He paused, struggling with his next words. "I cannot recommend opposing humanity, not because we cannot defeat them, but because I am no longer certain we should try. Perhaps there is another way. Perhaps friendship is not weakness. Perhaps trust can be strength." The Vektari Confederation debated his report for months. Some argued that it proved the humans were manipulative, using psychological tactics to undermine Vektari resolve. Others argued that it showed the humans could be valuable allies if the Vektari were willing to take the risk. The debate grew heated, with ancient rivalries and new fears mixing into a volatile combination. In the end, they decided to send a delegation to Earth, not to negotiate terms or sign treaties, but simply to learn, to understand who these strange humans really were and whether they could be trusted. The delegation was led by Zektai himself. He arrived on Earth expecting to find a carefully constructed facade, a society designed to impress and mislead foreign visitors. What he found instead was chaos. Humans argued with each other constantly. They disagreed about politics, religion, art, food, and countless other things that Zektai could not even begin to understand. They protested against their own government, criticized their own leaders, and openly discussed their own flaws and failures. Nothing was hidden, nothing was controlled. The chaos was everywhere, visible to anyone who looked. It was completely unlike any alien civilization Zektai had ever encountered. Most species presented a unified face to outsiders, hiding internal conflicts and disagreements. They understood that showing division was showing weakness, inviting exploitation. The humans did not seem capable of such discipline, or perhaps they simply did not care. But there was something else, something beneath the chaos. The humans cared about each other. They argued because they cared, disagreed because they hoped for something better, criticized because they believed improvement was possible. Their chaos was not weakness. It was passion. It was the messy, complicated expression of a species that had not given up on itself. And they extended that same passion to their guests. The Vektari delegation was welcomed not with formal ceremonies but with genuine hospitality. Ordinary humans invited them into their homes, shared meals with them, asked about their lives and culture. They were curious without being intrusive, friendly without being overwhelming. A human child asked Zektai to tell her a story. She could not have been more than 6 or 7 years old, with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. He told her the tale of Valkith the Brave, simplified for her young understanding. She listened with wide eyes and then asked a question that stopped him cold. Did Valkith have any friends? Zektai blinked. He had many warriors who followed him. He led the greatest army our people have ever seen. But did he have friends? The child insisted. People who liked him even when he wasn't being brave. People who would come over just to play. The question struck Zektai deeply. In all the centuries of Vektari tradition, no one had ever asked about Valkith's friends. The epic poems spoke of his courage, his victories, his glorious death in battle. But they said nothing about the people who might have simply enjoyed his company. They said nothing about quiet moments, about laughter, about the small connections that make life meaningful. I do not know, Zektai admitted. Our stories do not tell us that. The child looked disappointed. That's sad, she said. Everyone needs friends, even heroes. That night, Zektai walked through the human city, thinking about the child's question. He thought about Valkith, about his own people, about the way Vektari culture celebrated individual achievement, but said little about connection and community. They honored the warrior who stood alone against impossible odds. They did not honor the friend who stayed by your side through ordinary days. He thought about Sarah Chen, who had learned Vektari poetry not for strategic advantage, but because she wanted to understand. He thought about the human families who had welcomed strangers into their homes, sharing their food and their stories without asking for anything in return. Perhaps, he realized, the humans had discovered something that the older civilizations had forgotten. Perhaps they understood that the strongest societies were not those with the greatest warriors or the most advanced technology. Perhaps the strongest societies were those whose members genuinely cared about each other and about the people they met. When Zektai returned to the Vektari homeworld, he carried a gift from the human child. It was a drawing she had made, showing Valkith surrounded by friends. In her interpretation, the great warrior was smiling, his arm around a companion, his face showing joy rather than grim determination. It was not historically accurate. It was better. He hung the drawing in his office, where he could see it every day. And whenever he negotiated with humans or other species, he remembered the child's question. Did he have friends, people who liked him even when he wasn't being brave? The years passed. The Terran Union grew, not through conquest or coercion, but through friendship. Species that had been rivals for centuries found themselves working together, united by their shared connection to humanity. Old grudges faded as new relationships formed. Borders that had been barriers became bridges. It was not always peaceful. There were conflicts, misunderstandings, and genuine disagreements. The humans did not solve all the galaxy's problems. Some problems had no solutions, and some wounds were too deep to heal quickly. But they changed the way those problems were approached. Instead of asking how to defeat their opponents, species began asking how to understand them. Instead of seeking advantage at any cost, they began looking for solutions that benefited everyone. Instead of treating diplomacy as warfare, they began treating it as an opportunity to make friends. Ambassador Vexthril, now elderly even by Corinthian standards, attended the 10th anniversary celebration of the Terran-Corinthian Alliance. The celebration was held on Station Nexus 7, the same place where the original negotiations had taken place. The conference hall had been transformed into a banquet room, filled with representatives from dozens of species. Sarah Chen was there, older now but still warm, still genuine, still the same woman who had asked about his star maps on that first day. Her silver hair had turned white, and her movements were slower, but her smile was unchanged. "Do you ever wonder," he asked her, "if your approach was a strategy, if humanity chose to be friendly because you calculated that it would be effective?" Sarah laughed, the same warm sound he remembered from their first meeting. "Honestly, I think we just got tired of fighting. Humans spent thousands of years making war against each other, and it never solved anything. Every victory just planted the seeds for the next war. Eventually, we realized that making friends was easier and more fun." "But surely your diplomats are trained. Surely there are techniques, methods, approaches that you teach them." "We teach them to be genuinely interested in other people. We teach them to listen more than they talk. We teach them to be honest about what they want and to look for solutions that help everyone." She smiled. "It's not really a secret technique. Anyone could do it, but most species don't because they're afraid it will be seen as weakness." "Is it not weakness to show such openness, such vulnerability?" Sarah's expression became more serious. "It's a risk, but we've found that the rewards are worth it. When you treat people with genuine kindness and respect, most of them respond in kind. And the few who try to take advantage find that they're facing not just humanity, but all the friends we've made along the way." She gestured at the celebration around them. Corinthians mingled with Vectari, who mingled with dozens of other species, all brought together by their connection to humanity. Warriors shared drinks with scholars. Ancient enemies danced together. It was impossible, and yet it was happening. "That's the real secret," Sarah said. "We're not powerful because we're strong. We're powerful because we have friends who want to help us. And the only way to get friends like that is to be a good friend yourself." Vexthril looked at the gathering, at the unlikely alliances and unexpected friendships that had formed over the past decade. He thought about the report he had written years ago, warning that the Terran Diplomats were dangerous because they made you want to be their friend. He had been right, they were dangerous, they had changed everything. And for the first time in his long life, Vexthril was glad. Later that evening, as the celebration continued, Zektai found Vexthril standing by a window, looking out at the stars. It had become a habit of his, these moments of quiet contemplation amid the chaos of diplomatic events. "I remember when we were rivals," Zektai said, coming to stand beside him. "The Corinthian Empire and the Vectari Confederation spent centuries threatening each other. We built weapons to destroy each other's worlds. Now our grandchildren play together." "Because of the humans," Vexthril said. "Yes, because they showed us a different way." Zektai paused. "Do you ever regret it, the changes they brought?" Vexthril thought about his life before the humans came, the endless negotiations that went nowhere, the formal ceremonies that meant nothing, the careful distance maintained between species, each protecting themselves from the others while secretly fearing them. It had been exhausting. It had been lonely. "No," he said finally, "I do not regret it. I think perhaps this is what diplomacy was always meant to be. Not warfare with words, but the building of genuine connections. The humans did not invent friendship. They simply reminded us that it was possible." They stood together in companionable silence, two old diplomats who had once been taught to see each other as enemies, two old friends who had learned a better way. Across the room, Sarah Chen was dancing with a Corinthian who had been one of Vexthral's young assistants at that first meeting decades ago. They were both laughing, moving together to music that blended human and Corinthian traditions. The dance was clumsy, neither quite sure of the other's steps, but neither seemed to mind. "The humans have a saying," Zektai said. "Make love, not war. I used to think it was naive. Now I think perhaps it was the wisest advice our galaxy ever received." Vexthral nodded slowly. "The Terran Diplomats are dangerous," he said, repeating the words from his long-ago report. "But perhaps that is exactly the kind of danger we needed." The celebration continued late into the night, filled with laughter and conversation and the warm presence of friends from across the galaxy. Speeches were made and toasts were raised. Old stories were shared and new ones begun. And somewhere in the midst of it all, the future of 100 worlds was being shaped not by threats or treaties, but by something far more powerful. Connection, trust, friendship. The humans had brought these gifts to the galaxy, not as weapons but as offerings. And in return, they had received something that no amount of military might could ever achieve. They had made the entire galaxy want to be their friend. And that, in the end, was the most dangerous thing of all. As the night grew late and the guests began to depart, Vexthral found Sarah Chen one last time. She was tired but happy, leaning against a wall and watching the last of the dancers. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." She smiled at him, the same warm smile he had seen on that first day all those years ago. "Thank you for giving us a chance. Not everyone does, you know. Some species hear about our approach and assume we must be weak or stupid or hiding something. You listened. You opened your mind. That's not easy." "You made it easy," he said. "That is your gift. You make the hard things seem simple." Sarah laughed softly. "I just try to remember that everyone I meet is a person with their own hopes and fears and dreams. It's easy to forget that in diplomacy. It's easy to see the other side as an enemy, an obstacle, a problem to be solved. But they're not. They're just people trying to find their way in a complicated universe, just like us." She straightened up and held out her hand. "Until next time, Ambassador, I hope it won't be too long." Vexthral took her hand and held it for a moment, not shaking, just holding. "Until next time, Sarah, my friend." She smiled at that, a smile that lit up her whole face, and then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd of departing guests. Vexthral stood alone for a moment, looking out at the stars. The same stars his ancestors had looked at 17,000 years ago when the Corinthian Empire was young. The same stars that humanity had looked at, dreaming of what might be out there. The galaxy was vast and ancient and full of wonders. But the greatest wonder of all, Vexthral thought, was the simple power of friendship. The power to turn enemies into allies, strangers into companions, lonely individuals into communities. The humans understood that power. They had made it their greatest weapon and their greatest gift. Terran diplomats were dangerous because they made you want to be their friend. And friendship, in the end, changed everything.